I want to thank you guys again for joining us for a second week in a row. Obviously, our topic is discussing your perspectives on the Chauvin trial, which is moving into sort of the final stages, it looks like, next week. But before we get to that, I think we just need to talk about what a week it's been. And I'll just throw this out to all of you. Can you give me just your thoughts and what have you been processing this past week, again, with the incidents that happened in Minnesota?
Yvette, why don't you? You're a lady of the group.
Well, just in processing everything with what's going on in Minnesota and what's been on my thoughts is that I don't think that we are going to find the justice that we're seeking in the midst of these types of trials, that until we are able to really address the root of the policies in place that permit certain actions that lead to these kind of deadly fatalities, we're just going to continue to see more and more of this type of behavior until we change policies. That's been on my mind.
Representative, you were talking about you're feeling a little bit nervous.
This past week, if the trial was not enough to continue this emotional roller coaster, the shooting of the 13-year-old and the shooting of the 20-year-old, has actually escalated those emotional feelings, that concern, that worry, that point that has moved me from being worried to literally scared, not of the people, but of what the outcomes of those actions can cause. So all week now is like how we're looking at the escalation of people's emotional being, and mental state. Now we're looking at PTSD on a much higher level, that individual on. We're looking at mental health escalating to a higher level. We're looking at individuals that now are making preparations, from police department to people who are protesting, and then those people that are so angry, they don't know what to do. So we have several elements that are in the mix here that is causing us some problems, and that's real scary. That's real scary to me. And so that's what's been on my mind, all week, and even now, and looking at and going into the next couple of weeks, it just man, it's unnerving, and that's where I'm at right now.
Reverend Johnson, what have you been thinking about?
Honestly, it's very similar to the same sentiments of Ms. Yvette and State Representative Akeo. And first, I want to thank Akeo for even extending this invitation, and you all for doing this again. I think the best, when we bastardize the thought of a man talking about carbon monoxide from the vehicle is what could have caused his death, it exacerbates those feelings that State Representative was talking about. When we seek to put a man on trial who cannot defend himself as a victim of police brutality, we put him on trial instead of the actual police officer on trial. We're facing major, major problems. When we allow for someone to understand and say that was not excessive force, we allow that type of mentality to spread throughout communities of color that says, I don't feel safe because this is what somebody is able to do to me without any repercussions. And for me, that's where I find myself. My girlfriend has a 1-year-old. He's a big 1-year-old. I have a 7-year-old nephew. He's a big 7-year-old. And at some point, my fear is that they'll be looked at as dangerous. They'll be looked at as criminals. They'll be looked at as if they are not who they should be, but who someone else is perceiving them to be. 13-year-old shot in the chest, 20-year-old pulled over because of tags and air freshener hanging from his car. And the crazy part about it is that there was an arrest warrant made out for his arrest because they sent the hearing Zoom link to the wrong email address. So it wasn't that he did something wrong. He got a ticket. He was supposed to go to trial for it. He missed it. He missed the hearing. They issued an arrest warrant because they sent it to the wrong email address. If you don't believe me, go to the Minnesota courts. Minnesota courts right there online. It tells you it was sent to the wrong email address.
Reverend Johnson,
This boy lost his life because of the Zoom link was sent to the wrong email address.
I certainly share Reverend Rahm's sentiment. I am a mother of 8. I have 7 sons. My sons' ages range from 16 to 35. And it seems very frightening that the quality of my parenting experience can be measured by how many of my children have not been killed at the hands of law enforcement. It is, I remind my children every day to be aware and be on alert. Like the lieutenant in the military that was pulled over and arrested because he didn't have a tag on his car, and he didn't pull over right away. He wanted to be in a well-lit area because he didn't feel safe. And because he made that judgment, those particular officers felt that he was evading them, and that justified them to use that force of the mace and that type of thing. So now I'm telling my 16-year-old and my 17-year-old, if you don't run from the police, you know, in fact, if you are ever even approached, put your own self on the ground and scream at the top of your lungs that you're a kid. Because I was in Ohio with the Tamir Rice situation, and that 12-year-old young man they alleged that he was 22, and he was shot seconds even before they could get out of the vehicle. That young man was shot. So we really just have to look at policing practices and attack the policies that even that don't clarify in greater detail when use of force is appropriate. So in the case of Mr. George Floyd, when he was stating that he had phobias, at that point in time, he could have easily been placed in the same position he was at when he was in front of the drag and walk, and maybe a paddy wagon would have been a better option for him. So we just really have to look at practices and policies and have human conversations and try as hard as it may be to rise above the emotion of disappointment and anger, but talk to the individuals that are actually in positions of power to collectively bring about change, and we have to collectively approach them. And I think that's the only hope that we have in seeing the change that we are looking to see.
I think you guys have all reflected on things that need to look differently, I'm sure, not only from your own perspective, but from the perspective of the folks that you lead and serve. Has enough been done? I think I probably know the answer to that question. Are there some specifics specific first steps of things that can be done in the near term? Because this is probably a long-term issue. What are some of the first steps?
Hey, Rep.
Yeah, I think that first we have to stop looking at things cosmetically. I think that's the first step. We have to start looking at systemic change. One of the things that we're seeing today in the Chauvin trial, what we're seeing in the other murders that have taken place, what we're seeing in, as Ivette had brought up about training, we deal with symptoms and we don't deal with the cause.
Mm-hmm.
And until we start dealing with the causes, we will always be reactionary. We're reacting to what a training is supposed to be, when we know that we have to understand that part of the cause of the root cause is training. But that training is rooted in conditioning,
Mm-hmm.
conditioning on how I view an African American male.
Right.
The respect of one being, number one, a human being and not an individual we should fear. We look at from the times of the 50s and 60s, when individuals, were conditioned as officers of the law, to have a suspect of people of color. They were suspected. You looked at young whites differently than you looked at young blacks. You looked at young whites differently than you looked at young Latinos. That is a conditioning we have to go back, and undo. That's going to take time. So we're looking at systemic. you know, Cosmetic is passing legislation or jumping up, as Reverend Rob said, trying to justify how an individual dies because of an exhaust, or, not saying that this gentleman, Chauvin, this isn't his first incident. This ain't the first time he was being brought up. So we're looking at a pattern that now we have to be able to challenge. That means we need to have reform that goes into the mental stability, the mental conditioning that we send our law enforcement through. Plus now we have to go back to say, how do we bring the community together? And it's not that it can't. And I'll end with this. What people don't realize is that we have one of the best examples of how we deal with that conditioning and how we deal with bringing a community together across this United States. And it wasn't that long, it was called September 11th. September 11th, people came from law enforcement, Muslim community, religious communities. We were example here at Nolan Plaza, that's what it was called at the time, where you had all these communities, and community came together and said, we're not going to put up with you now, dealing with the prejudice, the discrimination against Muslims. We're not going to have it. We're going to reach out. The mosque opened up. They did had community coming in, doing open houses across this country. Did that eliminate it? No. Eliminate the fear? Not at all. But it began the process where people will open up to be addressed, that the issues, the conditioning that we have. The problem is we didn't continue. So then we let it go now and fester the other direction. But now we're in a situation where we're so divided in this country now that if we don't go back dealing with the root cause, we're going to hurt decades and decades of generations.
Reverend Johnson, what do you think is a timetable for this? Is this something that you are hopeful can happen in a matter of years? Or do you think this is going to be a generational type situation where it's going to be a long time?
I'm hopeful that it could happen right away. I believe that by us getting people registered to vote and putting the right people in place, uh, I believe that we can get the right type of policies that Ms. Vet and State Rep have discussed. This is a battle that's far beyond, of course, even just Black folk, right? This is something that people are going to have to get behind, whether it's white partners, whether it's our Asian community, our Hispanic community, our Latino community, whether it's our Indian or Native American communities. People are going to have to look at this. We have inevitably hit a strand in this country where we have completely lost what it means to have heart. We need a heart check. And the surgeons that are coming in that are labeled as activists or agitators are coming in because they're trying to put the defibrillators back onto the body and zap the body back into its right rhythm and its right beat. We need a heart check. And right now, none of us on this call have been able to do it by ourselves. That's why we have to continue to work together and work collectively. I do believe that if we can do it now, it'll still be generational, because what they will deal with years from now will be different than what we've dealt with. What I'm dealing with is different than what State Rep has dealt with. It's different from what Ms. Yvette has dealt with, but the common cause of it is discrimination. The common cause of it is the overlook of people that look like me. Now, they didn't blow up a house as I was walking the streets like they did with State Rep. So we're dealing with different things, right? So change of that behavior came because of what they did. So that's no longer happening because they took the brunt end of that. Now we got to take the brunt end of some things so that my nephew, so that the youth that come after us don't have to take certain things. Now they didn't have Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram and cell phones with cameras on them when State Rep was walking the streets at 16 and 17. Now they do. They didn't have that when Miss Yvette was out here fighting and continuing to raise their boys in order to be good citizens and pushing them into this world. They didn't have that, but now they do. So there will be a different fight. There will be different things that will come up, and we have to continue to fight. But we got to learn from what other folks have done, teach and grow and push people into the right direction.
I bet. What are you, you talked about your sons. What's your message to them and all young people as we sort of look forward to, again, the different possibilities for the outcome of the Chauvin trial?
It's difficult to give my children a balance. I mean, no one wants to have their children walking around daily in fear, looking over their shoulder and not trusting police officers who not only, unfortunately, do we fear, but we also need. And this situation with the use of force really convolutes the benefit in the relationship that the community should have with police officers. And with my children being millennials and Gen X, it's really up until the age of them witnessing these actions, with their own eyes, it was difficult to convince them that they were in imminent danger every time they walked out of the house merely because of the color of their skin. So now that they are seeing what they're seeing, and as frequently as it's being published through media, I think they all have a respectful understanding of appropriate conduct. And, terms like, your rights, there's certain things that shouldn't happen if you're pulled over. My caution to them is to always be respectful and don't attempt to be, you know, car side lawyers. Just be respectful and answer the officer's question, and more importantly, avoid actions that would even get you pulled over in the first place. So don't be speeding on the highway, and you know, use your best driving practices, because fortunately I can say that with my children, thank God, I'm not, those are the kinds of incidences that I would fear could turn into situations. I have really good children who make really responsible decisions, thank God. So just the traffic issues is where I'm really guiding them in their actions to just be respectful and aware at all times. But at the same time, I want them to enjoy the quality of their life as they can. So it's difficult. It's difficult, John.
You know, one of the things we also have to look at is that we are highlighting a lot of of course, the police officers that are involved in these situations. But now we need those police officers who do not agree with Chauvin and don't agree with, someone that's been on the force for 29 years that can't tell the difference between a taser and a 357 Magnum, that we need those police officers to speak out. We need police officers and chiefs, police chiefs, to talk about, this is not correct, because if you're silent, then it's like you're agreeing. So that's not going to build trust with the people. So, administrators in the law enforcement agencies need to speak out, and we can't afford a good old boy system, at this juncture of changing the climate. It just like, it's really interesting, how, we can watch the trial, and we watched George Floyd's girlfriend testify, and she was talking about how they had an addiction, to opioids, not just now, they showed that when he was arrested before. So now where are the experts that are talking about, one of the reasons that we have to train our law enforcement differently is to be able to handle these situations, of addiction, like, and use the example of the arrest, not putting George Floyd on trial, but putting the system of what our training on trial, putting the system, on trial, on how we're responding and not funding mental health, putting the system on trial, how we're not giving the police department the expertise in it. You can't have a police officer, you can't have a police officer run up and deal with someone who is having a mental situation, or a breakdown, and they're not trained in that. You need individuals on that are hired by the city with the police departments to be able to complement them. But you got to have police officers and administrators speaking out now. They have to stand up and they have to stand for what is right. Just as they ask all of us to do in community leadership, oh, can you stand up? Can you talk against violence? Well, yes, but you have to do the same thing. You have to say this is wrong, and if it's wrong, let's deal with it.
All right, and Representative, I promised that I wanted to ask you about House File 698. Can you give us an idea of what that says and what your take is on it?
698, again, is a reactionary bill. It was set up to address what happened this past spring and summer. It's a bill understanding that when we react, even as legislators, a lot of times we react with good intention, but as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intention. At this time where they're putting in there, in the bill itself, the immunity of police officers, which this state already in our state constitution covers the immunity, when they put in that about how an aggravated misdemeanor now, instead of a misdemeanor, is raised to an aggravated misdemeanor if you harass a police officer, especially during a riot, you know, is a reaction to what individuals saw, of course, through the media, to where they saw buildings, broken into, windows broke, which they never saw those protesters that actually prevented property from being damaged. They never showed the protesters where they would stop individuals from throwing bottles, where they would stop individuals. So this bill was a reaction to what they saw in the negative, and not the positive, you know. And the other thing is with this bill, when we did the More Perfect Union, we talked to individuals who were protesters. We talked to different community organizations. We talked to different leadership. We talked to leadership in both parties, and we put together, not a perfect bill, but we put together a bill that we all could accept and work for, use as a catalyst to work on. The bill that we did, back to blue bill, there was no discussion with leadership. There was no discussion with community activists. There was no discussion with people like Yvette and Reverend Johnson. There was no discussion with the NAACP, with LULAC, So it was a total reactionary, let's show rural community, let's show other whites that we got it. We're gonna do something and we're gonna protect our police. That's what happened. That's what this bill does. And this is what we have to be able to correct and quit being reactionary and start setting down, again, going back to systemic, because what we did, we added, and I say we, unfortunately, I voted no, as many of us voted no, even some Republicans voted no, I do say we, because that's the body that I'm in, but, we added fuel to the fire. That's what we did. We didn't take in the emotion. We didn't take in the climate. We added fuel to the fire, and it may come back, and we may regret that this bill even came to the floor right now, especially within this next 2 weeks. We may truly regret it, without a doubt.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all again for taking the time, sharing your insights, sharing your perspectives. I look forward to chatting again next Friday. This will be an interesting week, so I hope I'm sure we'll all stay engaged in the developments, not only in the Chauvin trial, but across the country. So thank you again, and I look forward to chatting with you.